The crystal wine glass slipped from my numb fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of burgundy and glass. The dining room went silent. 23 guests frozen mid-conversation, their holiday laughter dying as my father's words echoed off the chandelier above us. "That's it. If you can't keep that useless old man under control, get out, both of you!" Grandpa George's fork trembled in his arthritic hands, a small piece of turkey falling onto the pristine white tablecloth. His eyes, once sharp as steel, now cloudy with age, met mine across the table. In them, I saw 30 years of humiliation flash by in an instant. My father stood so violently his chair crashed backward. The sound cut through me like broken glass. "Now, Harper, take your grandfather and get the hell out of my house." My name is Harper. I'm 28, and I'm a night shift diner waitress. This is the story of how I discovered that the man everyone threw away was worth $2.3 billion. I couldn't move. My legs felt like concrete as I stared at my father. Thomas Carter, the man who'd raised me to believe family meant everything, now treating his own father like garbage in front of a room full of people. Grandpa's wheelchair squeaked as he tried to back away from the table, his thin blanket sliding toward the floor. "Thomas, please," my stepmother Lydia whispered, her manicured fingers fluttering nervously. "It's Christmas." "I don't care if it's the second coming," Dad snarled, grabbing Grandpa's wheelchair handles. "I'm done pretending this is normal." He started pushing the chair toward the front door, rough and careless, like he was moving furniture instead of his 82-year-old father. "Stop!" The word tore out of my throat before I could think. Every face in the room turned toward me. "Dad, what are you doing?" His eyes were cold, colder than the December wind rattling the windows. "Choosing my real family over dead weight." The front door slammed open, bringing a blast of Portland winter that made the candle flames dance. Snow swirled into the foyer as my father shoved Grandpa's wheelchair onto the front porch. I grabbed my coat and ran after them, but the door was already closing behind me with a decisive thud. We sat there in the dark, Grandpa and I watching our breath cloud in the freezing air, while warm light and laughter continued behind the windows. His thin shoulders shook under his threadbare cardigan. "I'm sorry, Harper," he whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. "This is my fault." I knelt beside his chair, ignoring the ice soaking through my knees. "No, Grandpa, this is his fault." I wrapped my coat around both of us. "Come on, let's go home." What I didn't know was that home would soon become a mansion I'd never seen, and the frail man shivering beside me held secrets that would destroy everything my father had built. An hour later, back at my tiny studio apartment on Hawthorne Street, the space had never felt smaller. The heater coughed and wheezed before giving up entirely, leaving us in the dark with nothing but the distant hum of traffic and Grandpa's labored breathing. I lit every candle I owned, creating a warm circle of light around his wheelchair. "This isn't right," he said for the 10th time, watching me heat soup on my hot plate. "You shouldn't have to take care of me." "You took care of me for 18 years, I replied, testing the temperature with my finger. "It's my turn." But the truth was, I was barely taking care of myself. My shifts at the diner paid for rent, and not much else. Adding Grandpa's medications, special food, and medical equipment was slowly drowning me. I worked mornings at Mel's Diner, then stocked shelves at Fred Meyer until midnight, coming home with hands cracked from cold and feet that screamed with every step. Grandpa noticed everything, the way I winced when I stood up, how I ate half portions so he could have more, the unpaid bills I tried to hide under magazines. "I have money," he said one night, reaching for the electric bill I'd been staring at. I gently moved it away. "Grandpa, your Social Security barely covers your pills." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the flickering candle between us. "Harper, there are things about me you don't know." "Like what?" His watery blue eyes met mine. "Things your father made sure you'd never learn." Before I could ask what he meant, exhaustion pulled me under, but his words followed me into sleep, along with a feeling that everything I thought I knew was about to change. 3 weeks later, on a rare Sunday morning when I wasn't working, Grandpa made an unusual request. Can you drive me somewhere today?" His voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "Where?" "You'll see." The next Sunday morning, I helped Grandpa into my Honda for the mysterious drive he'd requested. The trip took us through neighborhoods I'd only seen in magazines, massive estates hidden behind iron gates, manicured lawns that looked like golf courses. I kept waiting for him to tell me to turn around, that we were lost, but he just sat quietly, giving directions with surprising confidence. "Turn left at the Stone Lions." I stared at the enormous gateposts flanking a private drive. "Grandpa, this is someone's—" The gate swung open automatically. 2 uniformed guards stepped out, straightened their shoulders, and bowed slightly toward our beat-up Honda. "Welcome home, Mr. Carter," one called out. My foot hit the brakes so hard we both lurched forward. What did he just say? Grandpa's weathered hand covered mine on the steering wheel. "Keep driving, sweetheart." The driveway curved through gardens that belonged in fairy tales, fountains spraying rainbows, rose bushes heavy with blooms despite the winter cold, marble statues that probably cost more than my annual rent. At the end of the drive sat a mansion so massive I thought it was a hotel. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice catching. "Whose house is this?" He turned toward me, and for the first time since Christmas night, he smiled. "Ours?" The front doors burst open before I could even park. A woman in an elegant black dress rushed out, tears streaming down her face. "Master George," she sobbed, dropping to her knees beside his wheelchair. "You came back." I stood frozen beside the car, watching this woman I'd never seen before treat my grandfather like royalty. Behind her, a dozen staff members lined the front steps, all watching Grandpa with expressions of relief and joy. "Mrs. Alden," Grandpa said gently, reaching out to touch the woman's shoulder. "It's good to be back." She looked up at me with curious, kind eyes. "And this must be Miss Harper. We've heard so much about you." I opened my mouth to ask who she was, how she knew my name, why everyone was acting like Grandpa owned this place, but no words came out. Grandpa gestured toward the massive front doors. "Inside, Harper. It's time you learned what your father stole from both of us." Moving from the bright winter sunlight into the mansion's grand foyer, the interior made my apartment look like a closet. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across marble floors that stretched further than I could see. Oil paintings in gold frames lined the walls, and a staircase curved upward like something from a movie. But what struck me most was how the staff looked at Grandpa. Not with pity or obligation, but with genuine affection and respect. A young man rushed forward with a warmer blanket. A woman brought tea without being asked. They moved around him like he was exactly where he belonged. "Grandpa," I whispered as we entered an office the size of my entire apartment. "What is this place?" He positioned his wheelchair behind a massive mahogany desk covered with papers, photographs, and awards I'd never seen before. For the first time in months, he looked like more than a frail old man. He looked powerful. "Sit down, Harper." His voice was stronger than I'd heard it since Christmas. "There's a story I should have told you years ago." I sank into a leather chair that probably cost more than my car. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see grounds that seemed to stretch for miles, gardens, walking paths, what looked like a private lake. 40 years ago, Grandpa began, his fingers tracing the edge of a framed blueprint. I started with nothing but a broken-down warehouse and a dream. Carter Development Group. He paused, watching my face. "By the time your father turned 30, we owned half the commercial real estate in Oregon." My stomach dropped. "We?" "Your father was my business partner, my CFO, the person I trusted most in the world." Grandpa's jaw tightened. "Until he decided he deserved everything and I deserved nothing." The room felt like it was spinning. "What are you saying?" "He stole from me, Harper, for years, siphoned money into private accounts, sold confidential information to competitors, forged my signature on documents that gave him control of everything I'd built." Grandpa opened a desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "When I confronted him, he told me the company would be better off when the old man finally died." The words hit me like physical blows. That's why. That's why he treats you like... 3 days after that conversation, my car was run off Highway 26 in the middle of the night. Grandpa's voice was steady, but his hands shook as he spoke. I spent 6 months in the hospital. When I got out, I learned that my loving son had me declared mentally incompetent due to my injuries. He took everything. I couldn't breathe. The accident, that's why you're... In a wheelchair? Yes. He gestured around the office. But your father made one crucial mistake. He assumed I was broken. I stared at him. This man I thought I knew, seeing him clearly for the first time. You rebuilt. I rebuilt everything, quietly, carefully, using different company names, different partners. Your father destroyed George Carter's empire, so I became someone else. He opened another drawer, this one filled with legal documents. Over the past 20 years, I've acquired 127 properties across 12 states. Hotels, apartment complexes, commercial developments, timberland. He slid a paper across the desk. Current value, $2.3 billion. The number swam in front of my eyes. You're a billionaire. He reached across the desk and took my trembling hand. And as of today, so are you. The document in front of me had my name on it, Harper Grace Carter, sole beneficiary. But why, I whispered, why me? His eyes filled with tears. Because when your father threw us into the snow, when he called us trash, when he chose cruelty over family, you chose me. You worked yourself to exhaustion to keep me warm, fed, and safe. You never complained, never asked for anything, never made me feel like a burden. His voice cracked. You, Harper, are what family actually means. I was crying now, ugly sobs that shook my entire body. All those nights I'd fallen asleep wondering how I'd pay rent, whether I was strong enough to take care of both of us, if my father would ever forgive us enough to let us come home. None of it mattered anymore. There's something else. Grandpa pulled out a second folder, this one even thicker. Everything your father stole, every crime he committed, every life he destroyed, I documented it all. Bank records, email correspondence, recorded phone calls, witness statements, 20 years of evidence. I stared at the folder like it might explode. You kept all of this? I knew someday someone would need to hold him accountable, his jaw set with determination I hadn't seen in years. The choice is yours, Harper. You can expose him or you can walk away. Whatever you decide, I'll support. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like gravity itself. My father had destroyed this kind, brilliant man, stolen his life's work, left him broken and forgotten. And when Grandpa had slowly, quietly rebuilt everything, my father had thrown us both away like garbage. I looked at the man who'd raised me, who'd taught me that family meant sacrifice and love, who'd suffered in silence so I wouldn't have to carry his burden. Then I looked at the evidence that could finally give him justice. I'm not afraid, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Grandpa smiled, and for the first time since Christmas, it reached his eyes. I know you're not. That's why everything is going to change. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through room after room of the mansion, each one filled with treasures I'd never imagined. Art collections, rare books, Persian rugs that had probably been woven before I was born. But what I couldn't stop thinking about was the expression on my father's face when he'd pushed Grandpa's wheelchair into the snow. Disgust, embarrassment, like we were something shameful he needed to hide. By morning, I'd made my decision. 2 days after visiting the mansion, I called my friend Michael Graves from my apartment to arrange an urgent meeting. I'd learned through mutual friends that Michael had become a federal prosecutor after law school, specializing in white-collar crime. When I told him I needed to see him about a case, he probably expected a parking ticket dispute. Instead, I walked into his downtown office carrying 2 folders that would destroy my father's life. Jesus, Harper. Michael's face went pale as he flipped through the bank records. This isn't just theft. This is wire fraud, tax evasion, corporate sabotage. Your father's looking at decades in federal prison. I know. He looked up at me, studying my face. You understand there's no going back once I file this? Your family will never forgive you. I thought about Grandpa's trembling hands as he'd tried to eat Christmas dinner, about years of medications we couldn't afford while my father drove luxury cars, about being called trash by the man who'd raised me. My family threw me out in the snow, I said quietly. I'm just returning the favor. 3 days after I filed the complaint with Michael, federal agents moved with surprising speed. I was reading to Grandpa in the mansion's library when Mrs. Alden burst in with a tablet, her face flushed with excitement. Miss Harper, you need to see this. The headline screamed across the screen, FBI raids Carter Holdings in massive fraud investigation. Footage showed federal agents streaming into my father's glass tower office building, yellow tape blocking entrances, employees standing on sidewalks looking confused and frightened. Then the camera cut to the moment I'd been waiting for. My father, hands cuffed behind his back, being marched through a crowd of reporters. His expensive suit looked wrinkled, his face drained of all color. When someone shouted, "Mr. Carter, did you steal from your own father?" He stumbled slightly. The camera zoomed in on his eyes as he looked directly into the lens. For one brief moment, I saw something I'd never seen in my father's face before: fear. 2 weeks later, the arraignment was standing room only. I sat in the front row with Grandpa, watching my father shuffle in wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller, older, broken. When the judge read the charges, wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, forgery, each word hit like a physical blow. Thomas Carter, you are charged with systematically defrauding your father's company of over $30 million. My father's shoulders shook with each accusation. When his lawyer tried to argue that the evidence was fabricated, Michael stood up with a briefcase full of documentation that took 20 minutes just to list. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every day, I wheeled Grandpa into that courthouse and listened to the truth being spoken aloud for the first time. Phone recordings of my father saying, "The old man should have died in that crash." Bank statements showing money diverted from Grandpa's medical care into luxury purchases. Testimony from former employees who described years of intimidation and corruption. On the day of sentencing, my father finally looked at us. His eyes, once so cold and commanding, were hollow with defeat. When the judge sentenced him to 22 years in federal prison, he collapsed forward like the words had physically hit him. As the guards led him away in shackles, he turned one last time. "Dad," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm sorry." Grandpa closed his eyes, 2 tears rolling down his cheeks. But he didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The victory felt hollow at first. Justice had been served, but it came with the cost of watching my father, no matter how terrible he'd become, destroyed completely. Lydia lost the house, the cars, everything. She filed for divorce during the trial, finalizing their separation 3 months after Thomas's sentencing. She moved in with her sister in Cleveland, broken and bitter. But slowly, something beautiful began to grow from the ashes. In the months that followed the sentencing, I started the George Carter Foundation, providing scholarships for young people from struggling families, kids who worked multiple jobs the way I had, who took care of elderly relatives, who understood that family wasn't about blood. It was about choice. Grandpa thrived in ways I hadn't seen in years. Surrounded by respect instead of contempt, purpose instead of abandonment, he began working again. Not for money, but for the joy of building something meaningful. "I thought my story was over," he told me one evening as we watched the sunset from his favorite garden bench. But it was just beginning a new chapter. 6 months later, I met David at a foundation event. He was a social worker who'd grown up in foster care. Someone who understood that real family was built, not born. Our courtship unfolded slowly over shared volunteer work and long conversations about healing broken systems. When he looked at me, he didn't see money or scandal. He saw someone who'd chosen love over convenience, justice over comfort. Our wedding was small, held in the mansion's garden with Grandpa officiating. Not because we couldn't afford something bigger, but because we'd both learned that the most important moments happen among people who truly see you. When our daughter Emma was born 2 years later, the first person to hold her was her great-grandfather. Grandpa cried as he traced her tiny fingers, whispering stories about dignity, courage, and choosing to build rather than destroy. My father wrote letters from prison. I read the first few, filled with apologies and explanations that felt decades too late. After 2 years of unopened letters, I finally wrote back, telling Thomas that forgiveness would require actions, not just words. He would need to prove his transformation through how he spent his remaining years, whether in prisons or after release. On the 5th anniversary of that Christmas night, I stood in the same garden where Grandpa had once felt worthless and forgotten. Now it buzzed with scholarship recipients, foundation staff, and families we'd helped rebuild their lives. "You did this," I told Grandpa, as we watched children play on swings we'd installed near the rose bushes. He shook his head, smiling. "We did this. The moment you chose to stay in that snow with me instead of going back inside to warmth, that's when everything changed." I knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his weathered hand in mine. "I love you, Grandpa." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." He passed peacefully that fall, his heart simply stopping during his afternoon nap in the garden he loved. The funeral filled the largest cathedral in Portland, not with wealthy associates or business contacts, but with scholarship recipients, foundation families, and everyone whose life he'd quietly improved over the years. At the service, a young woman I didn't recognize approached me. "Mr. Carter paid for my nursing degree," she said through tears. "He never wanted credit, never asked for anything back. He just said everyone deserved a chance to build something beautiful." That's when I understood his real legacy. Not the billion-dollar empire or the justice finally served, but the simple truth he'd lived every day. Love builds while fear destroys, and the family you choose will always matter more than the family you're born into. Today, I run 3 foundations from the mansion that was once a symbol of my grandfather's isolation. Emma, now 5, plays in the same library where he first told me the truth about our family. When she asks about her grandfather Thomas, I tell her he made choices that hurt people, including himself. But when she asks about great-grandpa George, I tell her about a man who survived betrayal, rebuilt from nothing, and chose kindness, even when the world was cruel. I tell her about Christmas night when everything seemed lost, and how sometimes losing everything is the first step toward finding what actually matters. And sometimes, when the light hits the garden just right, I swear I can still hear his voice on the wind, reminding me that love, real, chosen, sacrificial love, is the only inheritance that truly lasts. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, 0 cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.